Right, so now we're going to talk about properties involving whole numbers. Now, when we learn these properties, remember the only thing that this enables us to do is that we can utilize it when we're given a specific scenario. And so just keeping these principles at the back of your mind will enable you to simplify a lot of calculations because we can just use these simple facts. So the first thing we talk about is the commutative property. And basically what the commutative property states is that by changing the order of the numbers, we do not change the answer. And so let's look at addition. When we say 1 plus 2 is the same as 2 plus 1. We say 1 times 2 is the same as 2 times 1. Therefore, we say that addition and multiplication are commutative because changing the order of the numbers when we use these operations does not change the answer. However, when we use subtraction and division, 1 minus 2 is not the same as 2 minus 1, and 1 divided by 2 is not the same as 2 divided by 1. And so therefore we say that division and subtraction is not commutative, right? So whenever you think about the commutative property, you need to think about the order. Then we have the associative property, which talks about grouping terms. 1 plus 2 plus 3 is the same as 2 plus 1 plus 3, right? So just grouping the terms does not change the answer. The left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side. If you have 1 times 2 times 3 is the same as 1 times 2 times 3. So therefore, these here, addition and multiplication, are associative. However, when we do that with subtraction and division, we do not get the same answer. And so therefore, what we can say is that addition and multiplication is both commutative and associative because changing the order or grouping terms does not change the answer. But subtraction and division is not associative or commutative because changing the order or grouping terms will give a different answer. Right, so when you're working with calculations, when you're doing calculations, you need to know what you can do with these operations. Right, so you need to be very mindful when you're working with subtraction because just by changing the order of something will cause the answer to be different. So just keep these principles at the back of your mind. So the thing that you should be more focused on is subtraction and division because we can change the meaning of an answer entirely just by changing the order or just by grouping it differently, right? So that's what you need to remember. Then we have the distributive property. Multiplying a number by the addition or subtraction of a group of numbers is the same as multiplying each number separately. And so what this enables me to do is it enables me to simplify questions. So what I can do is when I'm multiplying one number by the addition or subtraction of two different numbers, then I can just put it into the bracket like this, and I can have AB plus AC. It's the same thing. Again, it's just used for simplifying questions. Right, then we have the identity property. The identity property is simply a property that enables us to add, subtract, multiply, or divide by a number that will not change the identity of the original number. Where will this be useful? More when we talk about equations. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Just keep these principles at the back of your mind. So effectively what we're saying is, we want to find a number which we call the identity element, right? That when added or subtracted to another number will not change that number. For example, if I had 1 plus 0 or 1 minus 0, this both gives me 1. And so what we can say is that 0 is the identity element of addition and subtraction, right? If I had 2 times 1 or 2 divided by 1, both gives me 2. And so therefore we can say that 1 is the identity element of multiplication. Right, so you need to keep these principles at the back of your mind. When we will use this will obviously be at later grades, but you need to understand what these things mean. The inverse property of addition states that an integer has an inverse that can be added to it to get the number 0. So the additive inverse is the negative of a number since the addition of any number and its additive inverse yields 0. So what does that mean? If I have 1, the additive inverse of 1 is minus 1. If I have 3, the additive inverse of 3 is minus 3. If I have minus 4, the additive inverse of minus 4 is 4. Where do we use this? Solving equations. So when we get there and at later stages, we will talk about this. We will use this idea, right? Then we have something called the multiplicative inverse. The inverse property of multiplication states that if we multiply a non-zero number by its reciprocal, we get 1. So if I have 3 If I multiply it by the reciprocal, which is 1 over 3, what do we get? We get 1. And so you're probably wondering what a reciprocal is. You see, any number can be written as a fraction, 3 over 1, 2 over 1. The reciprocal of 3 over 1 is 1 over 3. You swap the numerator and the denominator. The reciprocal of 2 over 1 is 1 over 2. So what we can do is we can say that if you have 3 and you multiply by the reciprocal, what this gives you is 1. If you have 1 over 3 and if you multiply by the reciprocal, which is 3 over 1, you get 1. Where is this used for? Solving equations. So you have to keep these principles at the back of your mind in order for us to utilize it. The last two properties are used to cancel numbers and solve for variables, exactly as I've said for solving equations. This is used in equations. And like I said, you do not need to know the name of the property, but you must be able to know how to use it. Right, so that's a very important point that I made here. You don't need to specifically know the name, you just need to know the function of it. Right, and so this is all the properties involving whole numbers: the commutative property, the associative property, the distributive property, the identity property, inverse property of addition, inverse property of multiplication. Once you understand this, study them, know the names, because at a grade 8 level, they'll probably give you questions that you'll need to solve, and you need to name what property is being used in a specific scenario. But as we progress and do more questions, you will see this in use.